The desert held its breath. Not a bird call, not a rustle. Only the low, rasping moan of wind dragging heat across the cracked earth like a dull knife. The sun hung mercilessly above the red mesas, burning the world into a trembling mirage. Far overhead, vultures circled, slow and patient, their shadows flickering across the canyon floor like dark omens drifting in and out of existence. Beneath a leaning outcrop of stone, chained to a bent, half-dead mesquite tree, an iron cage swayed in the choking wind. Each movement made the rusted bars groan, the sound of metal remembering pain. Inside it, slumped against one corner, was the shape of a woman too large for the space they'd forced her into. 6 feet tall if she could stand, shoulders broad, limbs powerful, an Apache warrior built for mountains and storms, not this hanging tomb. Her skin was streaked with dust and dried blood, her ankles swollen, her wrists rubbed raw where ropes had torn into her flesh long before they shoved her behind bars. And above her head, scratched deep into the cage's iron, the traffickers had carved their mark. 3 serrated lines like claws dragged angry across a plate of steel. The wind rocked the cage again. The woman didn't move. Not until she heard hoofsteps. A lone rider approached through the shimmering waves of heat. Slow, careful, like a ghost wandering too long in sunlight. The rider's silhouette sharpened as he neared, broad hat shading a weathered face, shoulders slumped with the weight of years he didn't speak about. Calder Rourke, a man who'd buried more than he'd saved, a man who rode these plains alone for reasons nobody asked. He spotted the cage and his hand drifted unconsciously near the worn pistol on his hip. Not to draw, but out of old instinct. His horse snorted uneasily, ears flicking at the smell of blood. Calder stopped several paces away. The woman's eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of the dying. They were the eyes of a mountain lion caught in wire, fierce, wild, bruised but never bowed. She fixed him with a stare sharp enough to cut him in half. Her cracked lips parted, and with a voice roughened by thirst and pain, she threw the first blow. "You going to have sex with me?" Her breath trembled, but her gaze didn't. "That what you came for?" It wasn't an invitation. It was a warning, a challenge, a shield made of words, shaped by whatever the serrated line riders had done before they left her to die. Calder felt his gut twist. That single sentence hit harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. It dragged up the darkest corners of his past, the things he failed to prevent, the things he failed to fight for. He swallowed hard. His throat felt like sand. "No," he said quietly. "I ain't that kind of man." Her eyes narrowed, searching him, testing him. Then the wind shifted, carrying something darker across the plains, the faint, rhythmic thunder of multiple horses, far off but moving with purpose. Calder turned his head slightly, listening. His horse shied, anxious. Whoever left her here wasn't done. He could walk away, pretend he heard nothing, pretend he saw nothing. Let the desert claim a life it didn't know him to save. Men like him were better at walking away than standing still. But her gaze held him. Pain buried beneath layers of Apache pride, defiance shining even through battered flesh. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't begging. She was simply refusing to die bowed. Calder stepped closer. The cage loomed like a hanging question. He drew a rusted crowbar from his saddlebag, fingers trembling, not from fear of the men approaching, but from the weight of choosing who he would be in the next minute. "You keep still," he murmured. She didn't blink. The bar slipped into the lock's corroded jaw. He grunted, pulling hard. Metal shrieked in protest, echoing off the canyon walls. Sweat rolled down his temples. He pulled again. The lock snapped. The cage door swung open with a cry like an animal released. The woman staggered, her legs buckling. Calder caught her before she hit the ground, her weight nearly driving him to his knees. She hissed in pain, but didn't fight him. Behind them, dust clouds rose on the horizon. They were coming back, and by lifting her from that cage, Calder Rourke had chosen his side.
The ride back to Calder's cabin unfolded beneath a sky turning the color of cooling embers. The last bands of sunlight clung to the canyon walls like stubborn fire, bleeding red across the Cottonwood Valley. Calder kept his horse steady, one arm wrapped around the towering Apache woman slumped weakly against him. Nayeli of the Red Mesa clan. Her name he learned only because she whispered it once, more to the wind than to him. She weighed heavy, not just in his arms but in his conscience. Every jolt of the trail made her hiss through clenched teeth, yet she refused to sag fully, holding herself upright with the pride of someone who would rather die than be carried. The cabin emerged from between the trees, a crooked wooden structure stained by years of storms and loneliness. When Calder helped her down, she recoiled at his touch, steadying herself with trembling legs. Inside, the air smelled of old cedar and smoke. Shadows moved like silent watchers along the beams. Calder lit the lantern nearest the table, its soft glow spilling warmth over the rough wooden walls. Outside, crickets began their nightly chorus, but inside the cabin, tension pressed down like an invisible hand. Nayeli stood near the door at first, posture sharp as a blade. She watched every movement with the mistrust of a wolf cornered in unfamiliar territory. Calder filled a pot with creek water and set it over the fire. Flames licked upward, cracking and popping, sending orange light dancing across her bruised skin. He gestured to the bedroll near the hearth. "You ought to sit," he murmured. "I stand," she said, voice rough, jaw tight. He said no more. Instead, he dipped a cloth into the steaming pot and approached slowly, giving her enough time to stop him if she chose. She didn't. But when the cloth touched her arm, a violent shudder ran through her, and her good hand instinctively shot up as though to block a remembered blow. She forced it down, trembling. "Easy," Calder whispered. Nayeli's breath came sharp. "It is not the pain," she said. "It is what they meant to do." Her words hung between them, heavy as iron. Calder's stomach tightened. He cleaned the caked blood along her shoulder, then the rope burns around her wrists, ropes that had cut deeper than flesh. The room stayed quiet except for the soft scrape of cloth on skin and the restless crackle of the fire. Outside, a coyote called once, long and mournful. Gradually, Nayeli's rigid stance eased. She allowed him to guide her to the bedroll, allowed him to bind her wounds, allowed silence to become something less threatening. When he asked what happened, she answered in clipped fragments. "Ambushed. White men. Serrated lines. Took my sister. Scattered my people. Meant to sell us south." Her jaw twitched at the last word. Calder saw the fury in her eyes, hot enough to scorch the air. He kept his questions few. Words were fragile things, too many, and they broke. Later, as the fire dimmed to red coals and the lantern flickered low, Calder sat sharpening a knife out of habit more than need. Nayeli sat opposite him, watching him through half-lidded eyes. Her strength was returning in small sparks. She studied him the way a hunter studies a dangerous animal, patient, measuring, noting every scar on his hands, every shadow behind his gaze. "You carry ghosts," she said quietly. He didn't deny it, couldn't. Ghosts had names he still couldn't speak without tasting failure. Night deepened. Wind swept through the cottonwoods with a whisper like distant breathing. Then it came. A single drum beat. Soft, low, rolling through the canyon like a heartbeat rising from the earth itself. Nayeli's eyes snapped open. Her spine straightened instantly. "That is no war call," she said in a hushed rasp. "It is for tracking. Someone seeks me." Calder listened. Another beat, slow, intentional. The firelight trembled across her features. "You think it's your people?" he asked. "Or the ones who hunt what they lost?" Her gaze drifted to the window, to the black sea of night beyond. Long after the drum faded, sleepless silence filled the cabin, the kind of silence that thickens until it feels alive. At first light, Calder went to the creek to fill the pail. The air was cold, still. Dew shimmered on the reeds. Then he saw them, tracks pressed fresh into the mud, heavy, human, more than one pair, moving toward the cabin, then back toward the tree line. He knelt, fingers tracing the impressions. His breath tightened. Someone was close, watching. When he returned, Nayeli was already standing by the hearth with knife in hand, eyes sharpened by purpose. Whatever fragile truce they'd shared had hardened into something else, something forged by necessity. The storm wasn't coming. It had arrived in the night, while they slept.
Midday hit the valley like a hammer. The sun hung directly overhead, white and merciless, draining color from the world until everything looked bleached. Trees, rocks, even the sky itself. Calder stepped outside to draw water from the trough when the first shiver of dust appeared on the far ridge, a pale smear drifting across the horizon. At first it looked like heat shimmer, then like a gathering storm. But storms do not ride in a line, horses kicking up dirt like rising ghosts. His breath froze in his chest. Serrated line riders, 6 of them. They descended into the Cottonwood Valley with the slow confidence of men who believed the land already belonged to them. The wind died as they approached, leaving everything too still, the kind of stillness where even birds refused to move. Dust clung to their coats and bandanas. Their repeaters glinted beneath the harsh sun. At the head of the formation rode Denton Briggs, a mountain of a man, jaw like hewn stone, eyes cold as river ice. Calder hadn't seen him in years, but memory brought the old wounds roaring back. Briggs was a shadow from another life, from the night that carved shame into Calder's heart. Seeing him again felt like a fist tightening around his lungs. Briggs pulled his horse up short before the porch. The animal snorted, stamping restlessly, sensing the dark tension bleeding into the air. "Afternoon, Rourke," Briggs called, his gravel voice cutting through the silence like a dull saw. "Heard you picked up something that ain't yours." Calder didn't answer. He stood barefoot on the porch boards, unarmed, hands loose at his sides. He could feel the grain of the wood beneath his feet, hot from the sun, as though the whole cabin was bracing with him. Behind him, just inside the doorway, the shadow shifted. Nayeli stepped forward until the sunlight brushed one side of her face. She looked steadier today, but her wounds were still fresh, her breathing still painful. Fury carved deep lines into her expression as she stared down the men who had dragged her across the desert. Briggs smirked at the sight of her. "There she is, my property." Nayeli's jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched near her temple. Calder felt her anger radiating like heat off a forge. She wanted blood, wanted to lunge at Briggs, even if it meant dying at his boots. But she held herself, trembling like a wild horse forced into stillness. Calder stepped forward, blocking her from view. "She ain't yours," he said quietly. Briggs chuckled, a low, sickening sound. "Everything I catch is mine. And you know the kind of trouble you buy stepping between a man and his goods." He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "Give her back. I'll leave your house standing." Calder's stomach twisted. 6 guns, 6 men hardened by cruelty. He knew he couldn't win. He knew what they'd done to Nayeli, what they'd planned to do. And he knew, painfully, what happened the last time fear rooted him to the ground, the night that cost him someone he loved. Old cowardice crawled up his spine like a cold snake. Briggs saw it, smelled it, a predator recognizing familiar weakness. "Come on now, Rourke," Briggs drawled. "Don't make me paint your walls red. You can walk away clean. Just hand her over." Calder didn't look at him. He looked back, just for a heartbeat, at Nayeli. Her cheeks were bruised, lips cracked, but her gaze burned bright as firelight. There was no plea there, only defiance, only the quiet dignity of someone who had survived everything except mercy. And something inside him, something long dormant and rusted, locked into place. "No," Calder said. The valley seemed to inhale sharply. Briggs straightened slowly in his saddle, amusement gone. "Have it your way. You've got till dawn to change your mind. Sun breaks, and I come back. I come back, and I do not ride alone." He turned his horse with a jerk, the others following like wolves peeling off a carcass. Dust swallowed them as they climbed the ridge, their silhouettes shrinking to jagged shadows against the sun. The moment they vanished, the wind returned, cold, restless, whispering through the cottonwoods as though it trying to warn them. Nayeli stepped onto the porch beside Calder. For a long moment they said nothing. Fear hadn't left. They could both feel it crawling beneath their ribs, but something stronger had begun to grow beside it. That night, under the shifting glow of the fire, they worked. Calder laid out the map of the land he knew like the back of his trembling hand, the ridges, the choke points, the canyon walls that could work for them or against them when dawn came spilling blood and gun smoke. Nayeli, still battered, showed him how to move like her people did, where to stand to catch the wind, how to listen for metal scraping stone, how to use silence as a weapon sharper than any blade. Their shadows lunged across the dirt floor as they practiced, firelight bending before them like a frightened witness. Every hour tightened their bond, every breath pulled them closer to a single truth. The storm would hit at sunrise, and only one of them had ever survived one before.
Dawn crept into the valley like a bleeding wound, staining the canyon walls in long strokes of red and gold. The world felt half awake, half dying, caught between night's last breath and the day's cruel beginning. A cold wind slithered along the rocks, carrying the metallic promise of danger. Calder crouched against the ridge, breath misting faintly, fingers curled tight around the rifle stock. Below, his cabin looked small and breakable beneath the towering cliffs, a lonely patch of wood and hope in a land that favored neither. Beside him, Nayeli moved like carved stone come alive. Her face was painted with ash and earth in the style of her people, lines drawn with trembling hands during the night, marking protection, clarity, defiance. The rising sun caught the edges of her features, turning her into a silhouette of ancient strength. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tension in her shoulders told him she had stepped into the same old world of battle she had known since childhood. A distant tremor rippled through the valley floor. Then another. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, cruel. The serrated line riders appeared like demons cresting the ridge, riding in a tight formation, rifles glinting sharp as broken glass. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the morning air. Dust rose around them, swirling upward like the spirits of the dead rising to watch the violence to come. At their center, Denton Briggs rode with the confidence of a man who'd never bled for anything but gold. His grin flashed cold and crooked. Calder's heart hammered, but his breath stayed steady. Something about this moment, the cold air, the rising sun, Nayeli's presence, had steadied him in ways he didn't recognize. Perhaps fear had finally run itself dry. Perhaps he had simply decided that dying with purpose was worth more than surviving without it. A single bird cried overhead, startled into flight. The valley held still. The first gunshot ripped the morning open. Stone exploded inches from Calder's head. The rifle's crack echoed down the canyon walls, bouncing from rock to rock until it sounded like a dozen shots instead of one. Calder fired back, his bullet clipping a rider's hat clean off. Nayeli had moved before he even heard the second shot, dropping low, rolling across the ridge, and releasing an arrow that whistled through the thin dawn air before burying itself in a rider's shoulder. The man toppled from his horse, screaming. Gunfire erupted in furious bursts, lighting the canyon with muzzle flashes that flickered like wildfire trapped between stone walls. Dust blasted upward with every impact. Ricochets screamed past their heads. Calder felt grit sting his cheeks, tasted metal on his tongue. He fired again and again, each shot measured, deliberate, the way his father once taught him before violence had a name in his life. Nayeli was pure motion, a storm in human form. She darted along the ridge, her feet silent, her breathing steady. Every arrow found its mark, every knife flicked in her hand flashed like silver lightning. She didn't waste a movement. She didn't allow hesitation. Calder tipped her flank covered, forcing the riders to split their fire, confusion breaking their formation. Briggs roared up the ridge like a charging bull, anchoring one hand on rock after rock as he climbed. Calder saw him too late. Briggs slammed into him with the full weight of a man built on rage and cruelty. They rolled through dust and gravel, fists breaking air then bone. Calder felt the ground scrape his back raw. Blood filled his mouth. Briggs's laughter was a low, rumbling taunt. Always were a coward, Rourke. Couldn't save her then, won't save this one now. Calder's vision blurred. Red, gold, dust. Something inside him screamed, but it wasn't fear. It was years of silence, years of running from himself. He fought back with a force that surprised them both, grappling for leverage, striking Briggs across the nose, sending blood spraying into the morning air. Briggs grinned through the blood. There's the man you should have been. He drew a hidden knife from his boot. Before he could strike, a blur crashed into him, Nayeli, her shoulder driving into his ribs with savage precision. They tumbled apart, Briggs scrambling to keep hold of the blade. She straddled him, hand around his wrist, pinning it to the earth. Their faces were inches apart, her breath hot with fury. She could have ended him in a second. But she stopped. Her eyes flicked to Calder. It was not her kill to make. Calder rose, chest heaving, dust drifting from his hair. Every bruise, every regret, every ghost screamed through him as he picked up the knife Briggs dropped. He looked into the villain's eyes, the eyes of the man who had shaped years of shame. Briggs spat blood. Do it, or you're the same coward as before. Calder didn't hesitate. Not cruelty, not revenge, just a final, irrevocable choice. The riders saw their leader fall and broke. They fled in wild panic, horses kicking dust clouds that scattered like smoke on the rising sun. Within moments the valley was quiet, eerily, painfully quiet. Calder dropped to his knees, breath shaking, not from fear, but from a release so deep that it hollowed him out. Dust settled slowly around him, shimmering in the dawn light. Nayeli stood beside him. Her chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, her silhouette crowned in morning gold. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had survived. And the sun was rising on a world neither of them were the same in anymore.
Morning settled over the canyon like a trembling sigh, soft and exhausted after the violence it had witnessed. Smoke drifted low and lazy along the ridge, mixing with the pale gold light of the rising sun. The dust had begun to settle, each grain glittering faintly, as if unsure whether to fall or float. Calder stood amid the silence, boots planted in the blood-stained earth, breathing slow, shaky breaths. Every muscle in his body ached. Every memory from the night before pressed heavy behind his ribs like stones. Nayeli stood beside him, tall and unbroken, despite the wounds striped across her skin. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair, lifting them like the dark feathers of a desert hawk. She stared out over the canyon, her eyes reflecting something ancient: loss, promise, and the endless road ahead. Calder finally found his voice. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. "There's room here, a roof, warm fire. You could rest a while." She turned to him, the movement slow, deliberate. The soft light brushed the sharp line of her cheekbones, turning her into something carved from dawn itself. "My sister is still out there, my people scattered. My path is not finished." Calder swallowed hard. He had known her answer long before she spoke it, but hearing it still tore something open inside him. She stepped closer, not with hesitation, but with the solemn grace of a warrior honoring a truth. She set her palm against his chest, just above his heart. Her hand was warm, scarred, steady. He felt the weight of her touch more deeply than any blow he had taken during the fight. "You did not take from me," she whispered, "not once." Her fingers curled softly, grounding him. "You gave me back my breath." Calder bowed his head, eyes burning. He had no words that felt worthy. Nayeli reached behind her neck and untied the beaded necklace she wore, weathered from years, each bead telling a story in its color and shape. She placed it in his hand with reverence, as though entrusting him with a part of her spirit. "For courage," she said. He closed his fingers around it, feeling its warmth, its history. His voice broke when he spoke. "Thank you." The mare he'd saddled for her waited by the cottonwoods, stamping the ground as if sensing its rider's urgency. Nayeli mounted gracefully, despite her injuries. She looked down at him one last time, her expression softening, rare, fleeting, but real. "Walk with honor, Calder Rourke." He nodded, unable to speak. She turned the horse toward the open desert. As she rode, the sun spilled fully over the cliffs, lighting the dust behind her in a drifting halo. She grew smaller and smaller until the horizon swallowed her in its endless burning light. Calder stood there long after she vanished, the necklace clutched tight in his hand. The world felt different, cleaner somehow. The ghosts that once haunted him eased, their whispers fading with the morning breeze. He turned toward his shattered cabin, a man reborn in the quiet aftermath of truth. Some heroes never wear a badge. Some battles leave no monument behind. But in a quiet canyon, on a rising dawn, a rancher stood between evil and the innocent, and in doing so, saved not just a life, but his own soul.